A faint sound drifted from the locked room, cutting through the quiet hum of the approaching Christmas snowstorm. Owen stopped, his hand hovering over the rough-hewn wood. His instincts told him to knock, but a deeper feeling, a cold dread, held him back. No one answered his call. He pressed his ear against the door. A rustling noise whispered from within, followed by a trembling voice, then another, harmonizing in fear. "Please, open the door. We beg you." Without a second thought, Owen kicked the heavy wooden latch. The door flew open, and the stench of mildew and sweat assaulted him, a stark contrast to the clean, cold winter air. In the middle of the dark, frigid room, two identical Chinese women were tied to a single post, their clothes in tatters. Their black eyes, mirror images of each other, burned with a desperate fire as they locked onto his. "Please, take us with you," one gasped, her voice raw. The other echoed the plea, her words a near-perfect echo, "We will bear your children. Just save us." Owen stood motionless for a moment. Images of his lost wife and child flashed through his mind, phantoms of a past Christmas, how they had once pleaded for help, and he had been powerless to save them from the winter fever. He would not be powerless again. He pulled out his knife and sliced through the thick ropes. "Let's go," shouts echoed from the hallway. Owen pulled them both toward the back door, their bare feet sinking into the fresh layer of snow that covered the yard of red dust. They scrambled into the wagon as gunshots rang out behind them. Owen cracked the whip, the wheels screeching over the frozen dirt road. The small town faded into the swirling snow behind them, but the yelling still carried on the biting wind. In the wagon bed, the two women lay panting, their hands still trembling, yet their identical eyes no longer held despair. Now, they blazed like embers in the falling snow. Evening fell, and the desert landscape turned white under the spreading winter storm. Owen pulled on the reins as the wagon turned into a narrow canyon, the rock walls offering some shelter from the wind. He knew the men chasing them would not risk riding hard in the dark, especially not in a blizzard. "Get down," Owen said, pulling the brake. The sisters, Mai and Lin, looked at him briefly, then quietly stepped off the wagon into the deep snow. They still clutched the single rusty knife between them, standing tall despite the cold. The muscles in their arms were taut and veined. Owen tied the horses and built a small, sputtering fire from dry branches he found under a rocky overhang. He silently unscrewed his canteen and handed it to them. Mai and Lin drank in small sips, their eyes still watching him carefully, like a pair of young wolves unsure if the human in front of them could be trusted. Owen looked at them through the firelight. "I do not need you to repay me, and I am not handing you back to them." They stayed silent for a moment, then sat down by the fire, huddling together for warmth while keeping their distance from him. The red marks from the ropes were still starkly visible on their wrists. Owen pulled a clean cloth from his pocket and held it out. They hesitated, but eventually extended their arms. Owen bandaged their wounds slowly and gently, first Mai's, then Lin's. They held their breath, staring at his rough hands. When he was done, they gave him a slight, synchronized nod. Not a word of thanks, but their faces had softened. Night fell completely, the sounds of the howling wind whispering through the canyon mixed with the soft crackle of the fire. Owen leaned back against the wagon wheel, his rifle resting across his lap. Suddenly, the sound of horse hooves echoed from afar, muffled by the snow. Owen signaled for silence and used his boot to smother the fire. They all dropped flat to the ground. The sisters' warm breath hit his arm as they lay close. The hooves passed by the trail above, then faded into the storm. Once sure they were safe, Owen sat up and rekindled the fire. Mai and Lin remained still, but something in their shared gaze had shifted. It was no longer entirely weary, but touched with a hint of trust. "Get some sleep," Owen said, tossing them a thick wool coat. They pulled the coat over their shoulders, lying down on their sides with their backs to him, the knife still in their grip. Owen looked at their strong, broad backs, then leaned against the wheel again, eyes open deep into the night. For the first time in years, the cold winter night did not feel so empty. On the third night, the blizzard intensified. Snow came down in heavy sheets, pounding the frozen earth with thunderous force. Owen was covering the horses with a top when he heard a harsh, choking cough behind him. He turned and saw Mai curled up near the dying fire, sweat streaming down her face despite the freezing air. She was shivering violently, and the old rope marks on her arm were swollen and inflamed. Lin was holding her, her own face a mask of fear. Owen knelt beside them, placing a hand on Mai's forehead. It was burning hot. Without a word, he stoked the fire until it roared, boiled snow in a small pot, and heated his knife until it glowed. Then, he sterilized the wound. "Hold still," Owen said, taking her hand. Lin held her sister's other hand tightly. Mai clenched her jaw, the veins on her neck standing out. As the blade sliced into the swollen flesh, releasing pus and blood, she let out only a faint groan, then fell silent. Owen cleaned the wound and wrapped it in a dry cloth, his hands firm but oddly gentle. When it was done, he pulled them both closer to the fire. "Sit here." "Get warm." They sat down, the firelight casting shadows over the tense muscles of their shoulders and old scars. A long moment passed before Lin spoke, her voice rough and low. "We were taken from our village as girls. They sold us from one camp to another." Mai, catching her breath, continued, "Every time we fought back, they beat us unconscious." Owen said nothing, his eyes fixed on the flames. "We had a younger sister," Lin continued, her eyes darkening. "They killed her right in front of us that night. They swore they would never let themselves be tied down again." Silence followed. Only the steady howling of the blizzard echoed through the canyon. "I lost everything, too," Owen said, his voice as rough as wet stone. "My wife died of fever. My son followed soon after. I stayed on the ranch and lived alone for years." The three of them sat across from each other, the firelight forming a bridge between three tormented souls. No promises were made, no touch exchanged, but a quiet trust began to take root. When the storm eased slightly, Owen stood and laid a heavier blanket out for them. "Get some sleep. We have to leave early tomorrow." Mai and Lin pulled the blanket over their shoulders and gave a slight nod. For the first time since they were taken, they slept deeply, no longer haunted by the shadows. Owen watched them for a long moment before returning to his seat. He leaned back, his rifle resting across his lap. The desert night was quiet, but this time it was not loneliness. It was a beginning. At dawn the next morning, the sky lit up red as the first light spilled over the snow-covered valley. Owen stepped out early, walking along the row of wagons to inspect the area. On the snow, he suddenly spotted fresh hoof prints, deep and evenly spaced. They did not match his horses. These were from at least 3 others, closely trailing in the same direction. Owen knelt down and touched the print. The snow was freshly disturbed. That meant they had passed by only a few hours earlier. Back at camp, he found Mai and Lin warming their hands by the fire, Mai's face still pale with the lingering fever. "They're tracking us," Owen said, his voice low but certain. The sisters gripped their shared knife tighter, their dark eyes narrowing. "They will come back." Owen looked at them for a long moment. He could walk away. He could let them handle it themselves, the way survivors often do. But he saw something in their eyes, something unbreakable. The same look he had when he stood at the grave of his wife and son, swearing never to bow again. "If you want to keep running, I will help," Owen said. They did not answer right away. They got to their feet, striding over to the horse, carrying their gear. "We have run long enough," Mai said. Lin finished the thought, "If they come, we will be waiting." Owen nodded. "Then we get ready." They packed quickly and left the canyon before the sun rose too high. By midday, Owen brought Mai and Lin to his ranch, a weathered log house tucked deep within the grasslands, now blanketed in thick snow. A cattle shed, a wooden fence, a water tank, everything looked like it had just barely survived a long drought and was now bracing for a harsh winter. As soon as they stepped through the gate, Owen got to work reinforcing everything. He added extra locks to the doors and boarded up the windows. Mai and Lin helped clear snow from the paths and stack firewood into neat, high piles. That evening, they sat together on the porch. Owen cleaned his Winchester rifle with practiced care, while Mai and Lin sharpened their knife under the glow of a lantern. None of them spoke, but the silence between them was no longer a wall. It was an unspoken pact. When the storm came, they would stand together. In the distance, a wolf's howl echoed from the direction of town. Owen glanced at the sisters and saw them lift their heads, their eyes calm and steady. He knew then if the men did come, this would no longer be his fight alone. The sun stood high overhead, and the sunlight reflecting off the snow burned like needles against the skin. Owen pulled down his wide-brimmed hat, his calloused hands tightening around a length of rusted wire. The northern fence had been knocked down by winter winds, making it easy for the cattle to wander off into the snowdrifts. Mai and Lin walked up, each carrying a full wooden post across her shoulder, as if it weighed nothing. Muscles flexed along their sun-darkened arms with every movement. They drove the posts deep into the frozen ground, sweat dripping from their brows with each powerful thrust despite the cold. Owen glanced at them, slightly taken aback. These were no longer the fragile women he had rescued from a dark room. These were warriors through and through. "Watch your hands," he warned as the wire stretched taut. But it was Owen who slipped. The twisted wire snapped back, lashing across his wrist. Blood seeped from the fresh cut, a stark red against the white snow. Mai and Lin dropped what they were doing and took hold of his hand. Their skin was rough, warm, but the way they held him was precise and careful. They pulled him down to sit, tore strips from one of their worn leather skirts, and wrapped the wound. Owen started to pull away, but the look in their identical eyes kept him still. It was no longer guarded. It was something gentler, something rare. "You cannot do this alone," Mai said, her voice deep and warm. By evening, they herded the cattle back into the barn. Smoke from the log house curled into the sky, blending with the deep red of dusk. The cattle bellowed, their breath misting in the frigid air. In the middle of the chaos, Owen, Mai, and Lin moved as one, his voice calling, their whips cracking, until the herd settled inside as if guided by a single rhythm. That night, they sat in front of the fireplace. The wood crackled softly, casting flickering light across their faces. Owen set his Winchester down beside him and sat in silence for a long while. Mai and Lin sat across from him, their long black hair falling loose, braids having come undone. On their scarred, sun-darkened faces, their eyes shone with something both resolute and tender. Their eyes met his. No more suspicion. No more hesitation, only silence, the kind so complete even the wind outside dared not intrude. Mai leaned in slightly. Lin did too. Owen found himself moving as well, drawn to the mirrored warmth in their gazes. The kiss came naturally, unrushed, unplanned, as if all the days behind them had been leading to this single moment. He kissed Mai, then turned and kissed Lin, the scent of smoke, sweat, and winter air mingling between them. It was not a choice, but an acceptance. His heart, long dormant, beat for them both, for the shared strength and silent understanding that had taken root in the frozen earth of his lonely life. No words were needed because trust had already been planted, and now it had begun to grow. The peaceful morning was shattered by the sound of approaching hoofbeats, muffled by the snow on the main road. Owen was cutting hay when the old dog howled and bolted toward the gate. He squinted into the distance. 5 riders, wide-brimmed hats shadowing their faces, revolvers swinging at their hips, rode slowly toward the ranch. Mai and Lin appeared on the porch, their knife in hand, their shared gaze as sharp as a blade. Owen shook his head slightly, signaling them to stay back, then stepped into the yard with his Winchester in hand. The lead rider, a thick-bearded man, jerked his chin up. "We heard you're hiding some Chinese girls. Hand them over and things stay peaceful." Owen stood tall, one hand steady on his rifle. "No one here is property you can demand." Another man spat into the snow and sneered. "Don't be stupid, friend. We paid good money for them. If you don't give them up, this whole ranch goes up in flames." Owen raised his rifle, the barrel glinting under the winter sun. "You cross that gate and not one of you walks away whole." The air turned heavy. The dog growled low. Wind stirred the loose snow. The 5 men glanced at each other, then turned their horses. But before they rode off, the bearded one looked back, his voice full of threat. "We'll be back. And next time it won't be just 5 inches." The hoofbeats faded, Mai and Lin stepped forward. "They will bring more," Lin said. Maybe a dozen, Mai added. Owen nodded, his eyes cold as steel. Then we turned this place into a fortress. That afternoon, the three of them got to work. Owen stacked sandbags along the windows and reinforced every board on the gate. Mai and Lin cleared more paths for escape and dug spike traps along the fence, hidden beneath the snow. Their muscles flexed under the sun, sweat soaking their backs despite the chill, but their faces remained fiercely determined. As night fell, the lantern cast their shadows across the wooden walls. Owen cleaned his guns. Mai and Lin sharpened their knife. The rhythm of steel and stone wove together like a battle hymn before war. In the silence, Owen spoke. You can leave if you want. When they come back, it will be blood and fire. Mai looked up, her eyes blazing. We have run enough, Lin continued. This is the first time someone has stood beside us. We are not leaving again. Owen looked at them, and something stirred in his chest. Something warm. Not just duty, but trust. This ranch, this land, and these women, they were now things he would defend at all costs. The night was pitch black, thick clouds swallowing the moon. Wind howled over the roof tiles, and the creaking door sounded like a warning. Owen had just dozed off after a long day fortifying the ranch when the old dog began to bark. Not the usual bark for strangers, but something strange, almost mournful. He bolted upright, a sharp instinct rising in his chest. Stepping into the yard, he saw them. Mai and Lin, tall, strong, their muscles defined beneath the dim lantern light. They were tying a small bag to their backs, walking barefoot and silently toward the back gate through the snow. Stop! Owen's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. They froze, their shoulders tensed. Then they turned, their identical eyes gleaming with tears. If we stay, you will lose everything, Mai said. The ranch, the land, maybe even your life, Lin finished. Owen stepped forward, his boots crunching in the snow. You think I would let you walk back to those hunting dogs? You think I would watch them drag you off like some piece of cargo? Mai's voice cracked as she gripped the knife. You do not understand. Since the day we were taken, our blood has cursed everyone around us. If we leave, you will be safe. Owen moved in close, nearly shouting, his voice raw with fury and pain. Safe for what? To sit in this house alone? Empty? I would rather lose everything, this ranch, this land, than lose you again. Snow began to fall again, sudden and furious. Mai and Lin stood frozen, their fierce eyes softening, trembling. The flakes streamed down their bronze faces, mixing with rare tears. They let the bag fall. It hit the snow with a soft thud. Why? Mai whispered. Why did you choose us? We are abandoned. Marked with shame, Owen did not answer right away. He set his rifle down, then stepped forward, taking their shoulders in his callous hands. Because for the first time in years, when I looked at you, I did not feel alone anymore. Their breath caught, their chests rising and falling. Their large hands gripped his coat tightly. They stood like that in the swirling snow, their breaths mingling. Then, without another word, Owen pulled them both into his arms. The embrace was fierce, as if all three were afraid the others might vanish in the next breath. In the darkness and the screaming storm, the promise was not spoken aloud. It was made in the way they held each other, desperate and unshakable. They would face the dawn together, no matter how many came for them. At dawn, the sky burned red as if warning of something ominous. Owen stood on the porch, Winchester fully loaded, eyes locked on the snow-covered road. Beside him, Mai and Lin gripped their knife, their bare shoulders slick with dew, muscles taut with anticipation. The old dog growled, fur bristling. Hoofbeats thundered like a rolling storm cloud from the swirling red dust. Not 5, but more than a dozen riders emerged. They lined up, rifles glinting under the morning sun. The bearded man from the day before smirked. We told you we would come back. Now, hand them over, or you all die here. Owen stepped down the porch steps, his voice low and steady. You will only take them when I fall, the man signaled with a flick of his hand. Gunfire exploded. Window glass shattered. Splinters flew. The dog lunged forward, barking furiously. Owen dropped behind the fence and fired back. One rider tumbled from his horse, blood staining the white snow. Mai and Lin did not retreat. They charged, separating to flank the attackers. Mai swung a heavy piece of firewood, slamming one man down as he tried to climb the fence. Lin tore the rifle from his hands, fell back behind the sandbags, and fired. Each bullet stopped those who dared come close. Gunsmoke clouded the frigid air. Screams, hoofbeats, chaos. A bullet grazed Owen's shoulder. Blood poured, but he did not flinch. Every shot he took, he made count. One by one, they dropped into the dust. As the raiders finally panicked and pulled back, the bearded man fired one last desperate shot. But Mai was already there, standing on the porch, eyes blazing. She hurled their knife. Its iron tip struck his gun, sending it flying. He screamed and rode off after the others. The smoke began to clear. All that remained was the pounding of hearts and the sharp stench of gunpowder. Owen leaned on his rifle, breathing hard. Mai and Lin stepped to him, their strong hands gripping his shoulders, their shared gaze full of quiet fire. "They are gone," Mai said. "We are still here," Owen gave a faint smile. Blood still trickled down, but his eyes held something rare, peace. "Not just still here. We held our ground." They sat on the porch steps, exhausted, yet holding each other. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the smoke, lighting the wooden roof, shining down on three people who had once been alone and were now bound together. The ranch was no longer just Owen's. It was their fortress now, a place they had chosen to defend, to live in, and to love. That evening, Owen leaned against the porch, shoulder bandaged. Mai and Lin rested beside him, their wild black hair dancing in the breeze. Before them, the open prairie stretched in calm, snow-covered silence. And in that stillness, something certain echoed. They had found home.